introducing Craig tonight, I'm aware that there is so much I could say, and you will be glad that I won't say because it would delay things. I'd just like to mention a few highlights that I've chosen here. Craig grew up in the Hope congregation. In high school years, he developed serious doubts about the Bible and religion. In fact, he says he came close to becoming an avowed atheist. Going off to that intellectual center of UNC Chapel Hill, he found himself in an Old Testament class, valuing the usefulness of biblical criticism. And perhaps this allowed Craig to sort out what he could consider dependable history in the Old Testament from what might not be dependable history, and allowing that to stand. He said it opened his eyes to the usefulness of biblical criticism. During these university years, he also had a profound religious experience that brought him closer to God. Feeling a call to ministry, he went off to Moravian Theological Seminary in the far north. During many months of seminary studies, he had an unusual correspondence with astrophysicist Carl Sagan about issues in faith and science. Carl Sagan was not really a friend of people of faith. He had great doubts himself about anything good about religion. I'd like to skip ahead to mention his 7 years as theologian in residence at Home Moravian Church, about the years 2002 to 2010, before going to his present position as Charles D. Couch Chair of Moravian Theology at the Moravian Theological Seminary in Bethlehem. Welcome to Craig.
Thank you, Tom. And it's such a pleasure to be with you all. We originally were going to do this summer and then was unable to. So I've been looking forward to this for some time. And originally had planned to come down and do at least one of these sessions in person, which is a lot more fun, but the Omicron variant of COVID has made that difficult, not to mention the winter weather. So next week we will also be on Zoom, I'm afraid. I'll talk a little bit about what we'll do next week at the end, if Margaret reminds me. And so we've just started our semester up here at the Moravian Theological Seminary. Don't know if you've heard the news, but we are in the process of uniting with Lancaster Theological Seminary. So that's keeping us all busy trying to merge curricula and so forth. But over the years, I've developed all of my seminary classes I'm teaching online now. And that's been interesting. So I'm doing Moravian theology this spring and have someone who's indigenous Miskito Indian from Nicaragua originally, and two Inuit pastors in Labrador taking my class online. So we've got some interesting diversity in the class. When Tom first started talking to me about what we could do as senior friends, we bounced around several good ideas, and then it suddenly dawned on me that the Moravian Lebenslauf might be a really good topic for discussion. I'm going to share a PowerPoint, and I'll just start talking, but we'll try to have a little discussion as we go along. With the shared screen, I don't always see you. So if you need to shout out to stop me, please do so. I don't mind at all. And I think we'll, before I share the PowerPoint, I think we'll begin with the word of prayer. So let us quiet our hearts and minds. Lord God, we come to you with great gratitude for this wonderful life that you have given to us. We are grateful for friendships, for the fellowship of the church. We are especially grateful for your love shown to us in Jesus Christ, our Lord, our Savior, our friend. We pray that your Spirit will be with us tonight to draw us closer to you. And as we are drawn closer to you, we are also drawn closer to one another and to all your children throughout this world. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so if all the technology works and I don't give you the PowerPoint from my course on John Amos Comenius, I think we'll be good to go. Okay, so everyone can see that. First of all, I want to give a word of gratitude to Reverend Dr. Jill Vogt, who is co-pastor in Herrnhut with Peter Vogt. Jill did her doctoral work for her Doctor of Ministry degree on Moravian spirituality. And did a multi-week program in the Herrnhut congregation to help people learn how to write their own Lebenslauf. And she was very kind and shared with me some of her articles and information from her project. And tonight, this is more of an introduction. But I want to suggest to you this might be a good thing to have kind of a workshop on and work with over several weeks if you like this idea. First of all, have any of you written a Lebenslauf, like for Gemeinschaft or anything? I figure some of you have. Yep, I see some hands raised. So some of this may be familiar to you. But we're going to start with some of the history and then look more at what would be good to include in your Lebenslauf. First off is the fact that it's a German word. So in German, you capitalize all nouns. So you often see Lebenslauf capitalized. And in plural, it's Lebensläufe, not Lebenslauf. The word itself just means the run of your life course. And it has been used in German in a way similar to what scholars call your curriculum vitae or your CV, where you list out all the things that you've done professionally. But the Moravians' Lebenslauf is a little different than just an account of the things you've done in life. In England and the United States and other English-speaking areas, it's often called the memoir, but it's not quite like the memoir that a president writes when they leave office to justify all the things they did when they were in office. Many of our memoirs are very self-congratulatory. The Lebenslauf is a little different than that. It became the practice in the Moravian Church to have your Lebenslauf read at the time of your funeral. And that grew out of a German practice of reading the life story of important people when they died. So, prominent people in society, someone would get up and read an account of their life, similar to a modern eulogy, but much more biographical, often, praising accomplishments or talking about character. What makes the Moravian memoir tradition different from that is that it was for everyone in the community. And for every funeral, there would be some type of a memoir for the person. By the way, I think it might help to mute microphones. Got some background noise going on. And so if you are doing research on the Moravians, you can find Lebensläufe that are written for 2-year-old children. Obviously rather short, often heartbreaking and sweet, but Lebensläufe for ordinary people, for the ones who do the cooking and cleaning, as well as for the bishops and missionaries. Another thing that makes the Moravian tradition, or made the Moravian tradition different, is that people were encouraged to write their own Lebenslauf, which they knew would be read at their funeral. And there's this idea of, from the Middle Ages, there's a phrase, mementi mori, which is remember you will die. But the Moravians took this to another degree by having people write their life story while they are able to do so. Often people would wait until they're, in their 50s or 60s. It shook me up a little bit when I had my birthday in December and realized I'm now older than Zinzendorf ever was. The life expectancy was not so high in the 18th century. People would also often write their Lebenslauf when they got seriously ill, because you never knew in the past what illness could take you away. But it wasn't just in preparation for your eventual demise. People would often write their Lebenslauf when they joined the Moravian Church, as they explain to people why they want to be part of this community. Or at turning points in your life, you might write it. Someone like Spangenberg wrote his Lebenslauf at least 3 different times during his life. And in 1747, so this is 20 years after the August 13th experience, it was Zinzendorf who suggested that the Lebenslauf be read for every Moravian during their funeral. It had already become a normal practice to do this. He wanted to make sure this was done in all the communities. And just as significant, especially for historians, all of these Lebensläufe would be preserved in the archives. So currently, there's a scholar doing a major project of trying to put all the Moravian Lebensläufe in a digital format, so that everyone in the world can read them, because it's the largest body of written material from ordinary people in the 18th and 19th century. It's just an extraordinary trove. Now, by the middle of the 19th century, this practice of writing your own Lebenslauf had virtually died out in the United States. The pastor would often write a memoir to read at the funeral, but very few people were still writing their own Lebenslauf, even though synods repeatedly encouraged people to do it. And then in some parts of the Moravian Church in North America, even the practice of reading a memoir died out. So there's a lot of congregations, especially in the northern province, that don't practice this tradition at all. The southern province has retained it better, and I think it's really good that we do. And the funeral memoirs are still preserved in the archives if you choose. It means a lot to me to know that my grandchildren can read the memoir I wrote of their mother this summer, my daughter Allison, when she passed away. And that this record is there. So there are several people's Lebenslauf in the archives in the southern province that I wrote for them. Now, why do this? This is something no other church does. It is one of the most unique Moravian traditions. And I have found many people who attend Moravian funerals, this is one of the things that most impresses them about the Moravian church. One of the reasons for writing a Lebenslauf is that it allows you to interpret your own life. I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral and heard the funeral sermon and what the officiant says about the person, and sit there and think, I don't know the person that they're talking about. This is not the funny, witty person that I enjoyed being with. This sounds like something made up by a pastor. And the Lebenslauf lets you interpret your own life. The Moravians also viewed this practice as a way that you can give your final witness to the congregation. I grew up in a rural Moravian church, and we had a member of the church that loved to tell his witness, he would say, about his conversion or other things. And the Lebenslauf is kind of a institutional way that you can give your witness. What did it mean for you to be a Christian in this difficult world in which we live? And one of the reasons the church preserves all of these is because Moravians believe that the story of the Bible continues through history. So just as the Bible is a collection of people's experiences with God, their thoughts about God, what they feel God has revealed to them, that story continues. And your story is just as valuable to God and to the church as those biblical heroes and saints. So, we read about King David and read the Psalms, or we read the letters of James. Zinzendorf thought, we should be able to read Tom Halpert's story and witness, and Margaret Leinbach's story, and other people. But there's also a therapeutic aspect of this tradition, which I think it really helps the congregation and family and loved ones grieve when they hear the words of the person who has passed on, and that your descendants can know you better. Moravians believe strongly that when someone passes into heaven, they are not gone from us. They live on in our memories and in our spirits. And when we share Holy Communion, we share communion with the saints in heaven, as well as the saints on earth. Part of what I love about this tradition is when you go to the God's Acre, and I've taken, for 20 years, I've taken students to the God's Acre when I was at Salem and now in Bethlehem, and asked them to interpret what they see And of course, immediately you see all these stones that look the same, and you say, everyone is equal. There's this focus on uniformity in the Moravian church of being part of a community. And that, can sound like we're erasing our individuality. But with the Lebenslauf tradition, it's, every one of those stones, which has such simple language on it, name, place of birth, years of life and death, maybe a Bible quote. You can go and read the person's story. How did they go through their life, and what was their relationship with God through their life? So I love this uniqueness that the Lebenslauf provides. Now, the Lebenslauf is a church document. And so, a major focus of the Lebenslauf is your walk with God, your relationship with Christ, your life in the church and the community. That's not the whole thing. You do talk about all things that are important to you. And today, for I think most Moravian funerals in the southern province, it is the pastor who writes the memoir. Jenny can say more about this. I have found as a pastor, this is one of the most helpful things we do when someone has passed away, is that the pastor has to get people talking. So that you get the stories, so you get the flavor for the person, and you incorporate it in the memoir. But it can very easily start sounding like an obituary, just the facts. A good Lebenslauf gives you the character and the breadth and depth of the person. And it is so much more helpful to the pastor if there's already a Lebenslauf written by the person. I did, like I say, Lebensläufe for family members, and it just so happens that Jenny and Andrew were involved in two of them, and both of them added things to what I had written, which made it even more meaningful. About their impression of people in my family. It often surprises people at Moravian funerals that we laugh during the reading of the memoir, because we are full human beings, flawed and funny and quirky. And don't be afraid when you write your memoir to put things that will make people laugh. I often tell my students that unlike some churches, Moravians are capable of having more than one emotion at the same time. We can be sad and happy at the same time, and I think that's so evident in a Moravian funeral. Now, in the 20th century, in my lifetime, there's been a rediscovery of the benefits of the Lebenslauf, and moving it away from simply being read at your funeral, but to write your Lebenslauf for yourself as well as for your family and the church. And I think the seminary played a role in this. Dr. Glenn Asquith, who taught pastoral care and counseling, used to started the practice of having students at the seminary write their Lebenslauf. And the church uses it as part of the ordination review process. And it's interesting that these student Lebensläufe often start, especially if you're an evangelical, as your conversion story or your call story. And we have to work with students that know we want your whole life. reflect on your childhood, your growing up years, and all of this. And many students will write their Lebenslauf again at the end of seminary and look back over how they've changed. These statements that the students write are confidential. We don't publish them or talk about them, but they are usually shared orally in a small group or with the ordination review committee. They're not preserved in the archives the way a funeral memoir is, although some pastors, their Lebenslauf will be the basis of their funeral memoir. But this aspect of saying it orally is a really important part of the process. And I've done this several times, and it's always very difficult for me to share this story and have people ask questions. Now, some of you have written your Lebenslauf, and I bet it was in the Gemeinschaft program. That was, if you're not familiar with it, the Southern Province developed a spiritual direction program in the 1990s. And one of the first things you do is write your Lebenslauf and share it with your small group. And it's a wonderful practice to do this. And the group can help you, and you can hear how others describe their life. The Gemeinschaft Lebensläufe are kept private. They're not published. Now, what we're talking about is a spiritual autobiography. The first person we know to write a true spiritual autobiography was Augustine of Hippo, the great theologian and bishop. After he became bishop, he published a book called Confessions, which is a long spiritual autobiography in which he talks about his doubts, his wonderings, bad things he did, good things he did, and how he eventually came to faith and became a servant of the church. And then with the Protestant Reformation, some of the Protestant churches, especially the Puritans, asked people to write their conversion story. And in New England, under the Puritans, you couldn't become a member of the church without telling about your conversion experience. But women were allowed to write theirs down instead of reading it out themselves. And this is some of the earliest women's literature we have in America, are these women's conversion stories. Where the Moravian Lebenslauf is different from the conversion stories is it's your whole life. And one of the questions we ask is, how is God working in these other periods of your life? And it's okay, and it's even encouraged in the Lebenslauf to share your experiences of doubt or being in the wilderness or your wanderings. Times when you felt estranged from God. And so to prepare for this, Tom had wanted to have a little more knowledge of me than what's in my typical PR bio for advertising events. And so this afternoon, I wrote him a very short Lebenslauf, much shorter than my normal one. And you heard part of that, periods of doubt that I have gone through, and process of learning. Moravians have always believed that your coming to faith is the beginning of the story, it's not the climax. That it's important to look at your whole life of faith. And many people I know, have moments in their lives where they feel like everything is so right with God, they're following their vocation, and then get to midlife and it all falls apart. Or you have life events, family events, world events that shake your faith and your confidence. And the Lebenslauf is a time when you can talk about that. It's also a time to let other people know what was truly important to you. And here's one of the biggest challenges, I think, with the modern world is we have so many ways of communicating. And thanks to the internet, so many ways to communicate anonymously. And we have so many different communities we associate with who see parts of us that we've often forgotten how to share our deepest thoughts, feelings, hopes, desires with people and trust that they care enough about us to listen and this become important to them. And I think we've lost the ability to hear other people that way. And Jill Vogt in her workshops in Herrnhut to get people writing their Lebenslauf began with just telling stories. Just orally, without writing anything down, just to sit in a group like we have tonight and just pick one story from your life that you think is so important, you want people to hear it. I remember when I was at home church, a member of the congregation, every time I would see him at Wednesday night fellowship, and I would ask how he is, he'd say, "My feet are cold. They've been cold since the Battle of the Bulge. I never have been warm since that winter." And so it was nice at some point I realized I need to sit down and hear his story about this. What is it that keeps coming back to him? What is he wanting to say? And a Lebenslauf is a way for you to do this. What are those turning points in your life? What shaped you? What were key events, key people? Who were there for you when you most needed it? Who was it that opened the curtains so you can see the brightness that was outside? Now, on a real practical level, when you're writing a Lebenslauf, the first thing you should think about is, are you writing this only for you and God? Which is good. It's a good practice to just sit down for nobody else to ever read this and just write your heart as that your life is a love letter to God. And you want to put all this on paper so you can think about it and reflect upon the whole course of your life, whether it's 60, 70, 80, 90 years or more. And you never expect anyone else to read it. You don't want them to read it. There are things in there you would not want, folks to know. If that's the case, be sure and make that clear at the beginning. That this is only for you, not for others. Or you may decide that this is a memoir simply for your family. Things you want your children to know about you, or your grandchildren, or your great grandchildren. And you can make that clear as well. Or you may be writing it with the intention of it being read at your funeral. And there's things I would put in my funeral Lebenslauf that I things I would put in my private Lebenslauf, I wouldn't put in my funeral one, because it's impossible to tell my story without telling other people's stories. And I don't want my last witness to be something that would be hurtful to people I love. So, there's a certain care you take with that. And one of the one of the nice things about Moravian pastors is I have found they are very judicious. Uh, Sometimes people write a Lebenslauf that is far too long to be read, and so they do selective readings, which can be very helpful and powerful. If you do write a Lebenslauf and wanted to portions of it or the whole thing to be read, be sure and keep it with the other items that you have for any funeral planning you've done. So before I had my first open heart surgery, and I was not at all confident that I would wake up from the surgery, I put together, an order of worship and my Lebenslauf and had it all ready. I also wrote letters to my children to say things I very much wanted them to read. And Pastor Lahoma Good showed up in my hospital room in her jogging suit because it was 5:30 in the morning before the funeral, and she had rolled out of bed and came to pray with me. And I went into surgery not knowing if I would wake up, and was okay with that because I had put these things together. When my beloved Aunt Ima died, I did not write the Lebenslauf for her funeral. I couldn't even be at her funeral, but afterwards I wrote my own memoir for her. And I was very pleased that the archivist in the Southern Province stapled it to the one that was the official one that was read. This one was a very personal one about that wonderful person. Now, there's also a thing. I think most of us are not accustomed to writing. Writing is something I have always enjoyed. I've always done since I learned to read. I have been a writer. But I'm well aware that most people writing, when you give them a writing assignment, it brings back horrible memories of 7th grade English, and you expect to get it back from the pastor marked in red with all your typos and corrected grammar and so forth. And it can be paralyzing to have to write. Also, most of us aren't accustomed to really talking about ourselves in a positive way, except for a job interview. And even then, it's often hard to say, no, I'm really good at this thing. So there's a big hurdle to even starting to write a Lebenslauf. And I think it often helps to have a small group. Actually, we have more people here tonight than I was expecting. So we're too large to do this, but if you wanted to make workshops of this, you break up into groups of 5, 6, 7 people. And before you write, you just start talking to one another, to use I statements. That's another thing. Many of us were taught in English class to never say I. You say crazy things like this in this author's opinion. But with the Lebenslauf, this is all I. And that's good because you are dearly loved by God. You should be happy to talk about the experiences of your life. And so you can start just by everybody sharing one story. And it can be anything. You could all talk about the same stories of a similar thing. The first time you lost someone you loved, or one person who was important to you as a child who wasn't a family member. Just recently, our chaplain asked her how she was, and she said she was pretty good. And it brought back to mind an old man in our neighborhood that we called Uncle Wade. And every time Uncle Wade would ask me how I was as a child, I'd say, I'm pretty good. And he would say, I know you're pretty, but are you good? Um, he was also the man who told me that you need to learn something new every day, because when you stop learning, you stop living. And when you stop living, that's when you start dying. And so you can just tell a story like that. Anything, and they don't have to be good stories by any means. In my long Lebenslauf, I tell the very painful story of having a conversion experience at a revival when I was a child, and going up, and while they sang "Just as I Am" without one plea. The dog version of that is "Just as I Am" without one flea. And I thought, okay, I'm going to heaven now, and then praying to die so I wouldn't screw it up. And thinking about this when I was in seminary and making a vow to myself that I would try that nothing I ever said or did would make a child prefer death to life. It was a turning point that was different than what my pastor thought it was. But you can tell stories like that. You can tell stories of times of deep doubt and despair. But it's important, if you do this with a small group, that you also practice listening to someone, to actually hear what they're saying. And if necessary, you can ask a clarifying question, or to say, so it sounds to me like this is what you're saying. And the person can say yes, or, well, no, actually, there's more to the story than that, and so forth. Now, I understand that for some people, this is really intimidating to say it in front of someone else. And so that may not work for you, and it's better to just start writing. And again, you can just pick a story to write about. I've kept a journal for many, many years, and I find my life makes more sense to me if I write things down, and I think of things while I'm writing that I wouldn't have others. The most important thing is, don't worry about it being right. Don't worry about it being eloquent or beautiful or grammatically perfect. Your life isn't perfect. And that's the point of the Lebenslauf. Is one of the things I love about going to Moravian funerals is I usually leave knowing the person better than I did when they were alive. Because I only see one little slice of a person's life. And I always find it inspiring that these flawed people that I live and work with and worship with have such a depth of faith and love of God, and God has brought them through so many things. And so don't worry if your Lebenslauf doesn't sound as beautiful as someone's else. And don't think your life is boring. Your life is yours, and people want to know it. And rest assured that if you do write it for your own funeral, the pastor will improve it for you. And you won't get marked down for your typos. My mother was an incredibly creative woman, a poet. She only had a 10th grade education, which always embarrassed her. And I remember her telling me that she had a very good vocabulary, but she would often have to change a poem because she didn't know how to spell a word and she didn't want to have to look it up. And so she would just completely rewrite the poem. Don't worry about your misspellings, your problems. This is you. So there are, like say, hundreds of thousands of Moravians Lebensläufe. Some of them are published, not many. Some you can go to the archives and read. We're putting them online. And I can tell you there's no perfect model. They're all different. But here are some of the things you should think about including. You want your basic biographical details, when you were born, where you were born. Since this is, especially for a funeral Lebenslauf, include your church information, were you confirmed? What was your confirmation like? What schools? Talk about your marriages, your children, places you lived, what your vocation was, which may be different than your employment. I've known some people that say, I only work to make a living. My vocation is caring for people in the church. You can talk about those things, churches you've attended, people who have been particularly important, some of the objective kind of stuff you want to have in there to anchor it. But the most important parts of your Lebenslauf are highly subjective. So you can ask yourself questions. Who made you feel loved and safe as a child? Who was it that you went to when you were hurting as you were growing up? When did you first become aware of God's presence? Have you ever even thought about that? It may be you were so young, you don't remember how old you were, but there was something that made you aware that you are made by a creator who loves you with an infinite love. It has created a world of wonder and beauty that you are part of. When did you become aware of that? What was it like? What did it feel like going to church? Did you go to church as a child? Did you come to church later? Was church boring and you wanted to get out of it as fast as you can? My family teases me that the reason I became a pastor is because I can't sit still and keep quiet in church. And so I had to be the one to get up and be able to walk around and do the talking. I have lots of memories of drawing pictures in church and so forth. Who inspired you growing up? Who was it that made you want to be an adult? Who really, that you looked at and said, when I get out of school, this is the kind of person I want to be. One of the things I love about home church is the number of people that I so greatly admired in the church. And I would just look at somebody like, I'll just pick the recently departed Arthur Spall. And I would be in church and I'd go, man, I really hope I become like Arthur Spall or Bishop Wrights or one of these people. Who are the people that you loved? And how did you show you loved them? Sometimes say, the reason I know I have a heart is that it's been broken so often. You can talk about these things. What were your passions in life? Who are the people you lost? And how did that affect you? You can talk about your crisis moments. This can be really painful to talk about failures or perceived failures or challenges. Was it illness? Was it economic? Was it social? Was it your marriage? You can think about that. How did you deal with it, and how did God help you through it? If you found yourself estranged from God, what was it that brought you back? How do you understand this salvation? What are the things that have given you joy in your life? Are there any particular memories that just leap out at you? My long version of the Lebenslauf, I talk about the impact that the space program had on me as a child. I was born the year John Glenn orbited, and the wonder of the Apollo landing and all of those things. And I remember just endless summer nights doing nothing but laying and looking at the stars and feeling like I could fall into the vault of heaven, and all just how wonderful that would be. What is it that's made you rejoice in your life? When were the moments of your greatest happiness, your greatest fear? And you can break these down into smaller stories as you go through. The first time you write your Lebenslauf is the most difficult. And most people start thinking, I'm not going to be able to write more than 2 pages. And then they get 20, 30, 40 pages into it and think, oh my gosh, nobody can ever read this. It's okay. You will rewrite it. And take some time with it. Every time I write my Lebenslauf, I cry. There's painful things that I relive, and that's okay. It's important as you're doing this. This isn't like therapy, although it's therapeutic. It's not like going to a psychiatrist. But just keep reminding yourself that the past is past. It is. It's what was. You reliving it, remembering it, doesn't alter it necessarily, but it does alter how your future, how you learn from it, what you do. I have found many people, when they write their Lebenslauf, come up with a key insight that makes sense of their whole life. And often a Lebenslauf, you get a story or an event that then becomes what shapes the whole thing. Many people, what they find helpful in writing a Lebenslauf is to actually not start with their life, but to start with a hymn or a Bible verse. Something that has been important to you through the years that you may not even know why. Why is it that you remember this? For I am persuaded that neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in creation can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. You could take a verse like that and say, this is my story. This is how I've experienced this. Jesus makes my heart rejoice. I'm a sheep and know his voice. Whatever it is for you, and that can be an organizing principle. One of the things I'm so glad Jenny is with us tonight, because one of the things I love that Jenny did with my daughter's memoir was to identify how Moravian it was that she traveled. And that she embraced this world and wanted to encounter people different from her, just like her Moravian ancestors, and how this is an act of faith. And I hadn't put it together that way, but Jenny saw that and identified it. You can think about this for yourself. If you have someone trusted to work with, they may be able to suggest something that is the theme for you. Tonight, Tom introduced with, I had this memory that I had almost forgotten of having correspondence back and forth with Carl Sagan. And I decided to put it in so you would know that part of my story has always been being inquisitive, asking questions, looking for answers, causing trouble. I often include the story of how I got kicked out of Sunday school in 4th grade because I really didn't like the story of Jacob and Esau, and the teacher finally got frustrated with me and made me sit in the hall. But those are my stories. What are your stories? So anyway, that's what I've prepared for tonight, and I didn't mean to take all of our time. One trouble with doing this on Zoom is I couldn't see the clock. So let me throw it open if there's questions or comments or discussion.
Craig, I think you've implied that one of the great things about looking back on one's life is that you can see patterns that you've not seen before, and maybe even seen the hand of providence. I know Kierkegaard had a saying that life can only be lived forward, but it can be only be understood backward.
It's interesting you mentioned Kierkegaard. Thomas, one of the things I learned recently is his father was very active in the Moravian Society in Copenhagen, and Kierkegaard grew up with this tradition. And until now, I had not put that quote together with that Moravian experience, but I think that is right on target. And sometimes if we write our Lebenslauf early enough in our life, we can see the patterns and it shapes how we move forward.
Craig.
Yes.
Robert Sanders, that was very good, very informative. Sometimes I've heard that old-time ministers were very honest in their appraisal of a person, rather than sometimes now, you kind of sugarcoat it a little bit.
Yes, Robert, there's a lot of truth to that. One of my favorite stories was in the 19th century, I think it was in North Carolina, a Baptist preacher just decided that the funeral was the time to let everyone know that this man was such a sinner, he was going to hell. And the widow came up and slugged him in the middle of this funeral.
Greg, I'd like to respond to Robert's comment and say that for me, and I expect for a lot of other Moravian pastors, finding a way to be honest in the memoir is very important so that it doesn't become a false, cheery exercise in sentimentality. And one of the most powerful experiences I had writing a memoir was for one of our members who had struggled throughout his adult life with alcoholism. And his stepson, he died sober. He'd been sober for some time. And his stepson insisted that I share his struggles in the memoir. And I will never forget what the stepson said, which was, if you whitewash his life, you diminish his victory.
Oh, wow.
And I will remember that all my life. So, I don't believe that sugarcoating is the pastor's job. The pastor's job is holding the truth up to the light.
That's great.
And I just saw Mary Coleman in the chat corrected me correctly that it was Art Freeman. By the time I came to the seminary, Glenn was doing it, but you're right. Art did it coming out of his researches in Zinzendorf and Moravian theology. Thank you. Art also started our spiritual formation program, which we still have, and was one of my mentors. and could share his own struggles. This is one of the things I think is nice about writing your own Lebenslauf, is you can choose to tell your struggles in a way that's authentic to you. I would be rather embarrassed if at my funeral the pastor talked about how pious I was, instead of how often I make people in church laugh around me by pointing out silly things I see in hymns and liturgies and things. Or I would rather hope if Art Freeman had been the one to tell my memoir, he would tell everybody that I fell asleep in every one of his classes. I do think there's something, especially as a pastor, when I write memoirs, I imagine if the person were to hear this, would they recognize themselves? But I also do it in a way that it's my final act of love for the person. So it's there's old Don McLean song about Vincent van Gogh, and he talks about the pain and suffering that he sees in the world is soothed with the artist's loving hand. And I think of that often, that's what we're doing. We're not sugarcoating, but we are polishing up the tarnish sometimes so people can see the beautiful person that they may not have seen in daily living.
Could one way of expressing that be that the minister tries to render the humanity of the person? That's a phrase that I come to think of after a good memoir.
Yeah, I think that's another really good insight, Tom. And and I love teaching Moravian theology, and I think the core of Moravian theology, no one has said it this way. This is just my boiling it down, is that God became a human being so that we could become truly human. That we are not called to be angels. We are called to be faithful human beings. And the memoir is the way that everyone in the congregation can hear how you uniquely lived out your faith in this world. And there's a Protestant principle. We don't usually refer to Saint Augustine and Saint Francis. We're all saints, and so sometimes you need to talk about Saint Sarah Jennings, and it embarrasses Sarah because Sarah knows how flawed she is, and that's the point, is that you're faithful with your full humanity. There is nothing in our lives that is not precious to God.
So Craig, taking that a step farther, tell us a little bit about what you're doing next week with us. And you said that you might have some homework for us.
Oh, did I say I had homework? I probably should have thought about that. Yeah, next week we're going to get ready for Lent. We're going to talk about the readings for Holy Week. And like I say, in my own personal reflection on my life and faith, growing up with the readings for Holy Week was really formative for me. And I still love the readings, but we'll talk about how this harmony of the scriptures came together, the role of the hymns in that, how this relates to the life of faith. And I completely forgot what homework I was going to give you, Margaret.
Well, and maybe I had heard you wrong at the beginning, so I apologize. So thank you very much. And if you have another question or comment for Craig. Maybe he'll hang on for a little bit longer. I want to tell you all a few things. First of all, Wednesday night fellowship meals are suspended through February. So we will be gathering by Zoom again next Wednesday. We also, for adult Sunday school this coming Sunday for both Bible discussion, which is in Mark chapter 2, and for the Epiphany Mission Sunday School, which Donna Hurt is going to be talking to us about Tanzania. All of that also will be on Zoom by the same link. And Wanda Byerly has asked us to remember her. She's ill at the hospital, so let's keep her in our prayers. Any other announcements?
Looks like Donna's saying something.
Craig, Charles Turner, I failed to take notes, as I often did when I was in college, but I wish I had. And I don't know if you have, hate to use the word handouts, but you have ways of communicating this, your slides and so forth to the rest of us. It would be very helpful, I think.
I would be happy to. I can share the PowerPoint with Margaret and she can make it available. And I think we have a recording tonight. So you, the slides don't have all the off script. My wife has said for years when I preach, she can always tell when I've gone off my manuscript, and she doesn't always like it when I do.
And you're right. I was going to say, fear not. Sarah Katona waves her magic wand and works with the recordings, and it will be on the website for you to find. And Donna, were you going to say something? We can't hear you for some reason.
Muted.
You're not muted. I don't know if your volume's off on your computer.
Try putting it in the chat, Donna.
You might want to remember Mally because she did one of these last weekend, I think.
So we may want to remember Mary Ellen as well.
No surgery. So I'm doing all right.
And Mally said no surgery right now for her, is what they said.
I spoke with Mally earlier today and she has a follow-up doctor's appointment tomorrow.